Good morning. My name is Coral Owen. I'm the Professional Development Coordinator for the Military Families Learning Network. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's discussion on talking with youth about sex, sexuality, and media. In case you're joining us for the first time, I'd like to give you a brief tour of our webinar platform so you can find your way around. Hopefully, you're currently able to view the slides we're sharing. If you're unable to see them or have any other technical difficulties today, you can send us a tech support request via email to milfamln@gmail.com. As some of you have already done, we do look forward to having you join us in the chat pod today for conversation and for questions. To embed the chat so you don't miss any links or conversations, simply place your cursor over the shared slides. You should then see a toolbar pop up across the bottom of your screen, and then from there you can select the chat bubble icon. When typing your comments and questions, please be sure to send them to the publicly facing chat. This may be listed as everyone or all panelists and attendees, depending on your version of Zoom. Regardless, this ensures everyone who is on today's session is able to view those comments and questions as they come through the chat. If you're interested in downloading the slides and resources for today's webinar, you can find those on our event page. We'll place the link to that here in the chat pod in just one moment. Also note that we'll be covering evaluation and continuing education information at the end of today's session. Closed captioning is available for this webinar. If you require an accurate transcript following today's event, please email us at milfamln@gmail.com to request one. The Military Families Learning Network is part of a DoD-USDA partnership for military families, and our passion is to connect military family service providers and cooperative extension professionals to research and to each other through innovative online programming. To introduce today's speaker, I'll now turn things over to Kaylin Goebel. She's the program coordinator with the MFLN Family Development Team and our moderator for this session. Kaylin?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's session, and thank you so much for that information, Coral. It is my pleasure today to introduce Clifford Sipes, who is going to be our presenter for today's session. Clifford is the facilitator of Youth Voices at the National Center on the Sexual Behavior of Youth, or NCSBY. There, he specializes in the creation of youth advisory boards and getting youth and young adults involved in the training of professionals that serve them. He is also an Indigenous person with family ties in both Oklahoma and Montana. He'll be speaking a little bit more to his background today, so I'll leave that for Clifford to give you a little bit more introduction to his work and what he does in orienting you to that. This webinar has also been a collaborative effort with the National Center on Sexual Behavior of Youth, NCSBY, and is based upon work supported by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, the Office of Justice Programs, and the U.S. Department of Justice. So we would just like to thank Dr. Jane Solofsky and her team at NCSBY for their efforts in assisting with today's production and today's webinar. And with that, I am happy to hand things off to Clifford. Just one final reminder that, as you can see now, my colleague Jason Jowers has been popping some links in the chat as we've been speaking. As we continue on today's presentation, he'll also be popping in some links. But if you have not already, we highly recommend that you visit our event page for today's webinar to get a handout of today's slides, as well as a list of the resources and links that Clifford will be mentioning that will assist or be supplemental materials to this webinar. Thank you so much, and happy to hand things over to Clifford to begin today's presentation.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, you sound great.
All right, awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that introduction and for introducing me. Over the course of the next 3 slides, I will formally introduce myself and talk about this presentation. But there's 2 things that I wanted to mention first before I dive into this. The first one is that I'm so grateful to be here with you all today to talk about this important topic. I'm very honored and I feel very privileged to be invited to talk about such an important topic. So thank you for having me. The second thing I wanted to mention before I formally dive into this is that I stutter, and I will do really well for about 2, 3, 4, 5 months, and then I'll have a really bad week. And I've been doing pretty good. But I wanted to mention that if at any time the point in this presentation that I stutter, just give me a moment. I will get through it. And so I'm asking for your forgiveness from from the start, but thank you. I appreciate that so much. So anyways, my name is Clifford Sipes. I work with the National Center on the Sexual Behavior of Youth. This presentation is going to be talking to youth about sexuality, and pornography. So let's dive into it. So the first thing I wanted to go over with everybody is that these are the topics that I plan on covering today. We're going to be talking about how to engage with youth in general. But the point of this presentation, again, is talking to youth about sex and sexuality, consent, and body autonomy. But before we dive into that, I felt like it was important that we need to talk about how to talk to just young people in general, and then we'll get into those specific topics. But within that, what I found through the course of preparing this presentation, that there's the content of what's important to talk about, but also how do young people identify a safe adult? So I'm going to go over how do young people, what are the key indicators of a young person identifying a safe adult, the role that social media and technology play in this conversation. And there's an asterisk next to this one. The reason why is because this was not in the original learning objectives for this webinar. But as I prepared this presentation, it became very clear to me that it was important to also talk about mental health and how having conversations about sexual health impacts the mental health of young people. So I plan on covering that, and then how to talk to young people and engage with them in general, about how to have meaningful but difficult but also very important conversations about this. So this is my plan today. Is to cover all of this, and I hope it's helpful. I really want this to be helpful in the work that you do. And also the other thing that I would add to this too is that if you are approaching this um, along with your professional role that you play, or if you're approaching this as a family member or as a parent or as a community member or just someone who comes in contact with children, youth, and young people in your regular life or in your personal life, that's totally fine too. So because I want this to be as helpful as possible in all aspects of your life when you come in contact with young people. So that's my biggest goal for today's presentation. Um, Before we dive into it, one of the things I felt is really important to recognize just about my role was I have the awesome privilege of being the facilitator of a youth advisory at the National Center on the Sexual Behavior of Youth. And so this presentation, as I was making it, I went out and I talked to many youth advisories in Oklahoma, because that's where I'm based out of. And I told them, I said, I'm going to have this opportunity to go talk to professionals on and teach them how to talk to youth about sex and sexual health. And um, there are several youth advisories in Oklahoma that that's the reason why they exist. And so I wanted to acknowledge them and acknowledge that and the role that Youth Voice plays in the work that I do. But these are three different youth advisories that are in Oklahoma. But the first one I want to acknowledge is YAS, or the Youth Advisory Subcommittee, and they are mostly college age, and their goal is the prevention of sexual assault and sexual health education. And their mantra is to be the generation that talks. And so this is really the work that they do. And I had the privilege of doing a focus group with them and also doing interviews with individual members afterwards about this topic. There's another youth advisory called Youth Advising Youth, and they have the same goal, but they are mostly high school age with some college age, and their whole goal is youth advising youth. So it's young people advising their peers on this topic. The other one is the Youth State Advisory, and this is a youth advisory, and their focus is the mental health of young people and reducing stigma and training professionals on how to work with youth who are dealing with a behavioral health disorder. And so these are the youth advisories that I got to get the information from. And finally, the last one that I wanted to recognize, and the one that's the most near and dear to my heart, is the Youth Partnership Board. And this is the group that I have the privilege of facilitating. And the Youth Partnership Board is made up of young men who have gone through a treatment program for problematic or illegal sexual behavior and have graduated, and then have chosen to come back and form this group to advise professionals and to train professionals on how to work with youth with problematic or illegal sexual behavior. So this presentation today, everything in it is from the perspective of young people, and because it's my opinion that when it comes to working with youth and talking to youth, the most important voice in the room and at the table is the young people. So everything that I've shared today, it's from them. um, it's also infused with like the research that we have done as well. So, but I just wanted to acknowledge the that young people played a role in the development of this content and this information. I really take my cues from them on how to talk about this topic. The things that they say are important are the things that I'm going to be sharing today. And so this is from them. And I feel like I have the privilege to be the messenger for that. So youth voice is very, very important to me. Um, and so before I go into to this slide, I wanted to share more about youth voice in this topic. You know, this presentation, the goal of it is to try to prevent problematic sexual behavior from happening in the first place. And with the Youth Partnership Board, one of the things that we asked them was there anything that could have prevented your problematic or illegal sexual behavior from happening? And what they said was, if I had an adult in my life that, well, actually, let me back up for a second. If they said, if I knew what the sex laws were, if I knew what consent and body autonomy was, and if I had an adult in my life that had really honest conversations with me about sex and intimacy, had conversations with me about pornography, and and also just if I had those conversations, that would have prevented me from engaging in problematic or illegal sexual behavior. And so this presentation today is that the goal is we want to prevent it from happening in the first place. And that's the spirit we're following, is how can adults talk to young people about sex and about sexuality and about pornography. So that's the goal of this. And so I hope this is helpful. I want this to be helpful. Then before I dive into it, we will define problematic sexual behavior, but it's youth initiated behaviors that involve a sexual body part, genitals, anus, buttocks, or breasts. But it's not just those body parts. It can involve the mouth or the hands, whenever the behavior is developmentally inappropriate and or illegal based on location that they're at as well. And it's potentially harmful to themselves or others, because remember, not all problematic sexual behavior involves another person. Sometimes it can just be themselves. And that even though that there is a clinical program that is dedicated to serving these children, it's not a diagnosis. So that's also important to share. So that's our goal today, is to prevent this from happening. I do have a story about this. Was I recently just moved into a new home, and we sent letters to our neighbors introducing ourselves. And one night, one of our neighbors came over and knocked on the door, and I answered the door. And I have two small children, and we use correct terms and labels with them. Anyway, so our neighbor knocked on the door. I answered the door, but it's both me and my wife. I introduced myself, my wife introduced her, and I asked my 3-year-old daughter to come introduce herself. And she ran up and she said, Daddy has a penis, Mama has a vagina, and then ran off. And I looked at our neighbor and I said, these are facts. This information is accurate and correct. And the reason why I share that story is because as we had this conversation today, I'm going to use correct terms and labels. I'm going to follow the example of Youth Voice and my little 3-year-old, of using correct terms and labels and having honest conversations about this. And it's because that's what we're supposed to be doing. So, so that's this presentation. I'm ready to dive into it. I hope you guys enjoy it. But let's get started. So this first slide, it says we live in a decadent age. Young people no longer respect their parents. They're rude and impatient. They frequent taverns, and they have zero self-respect. Anytime that I share this slide in person, I always ask, like, what year do you think that this quote was given? And I'll get stuff like, well, today, or like the 80s or the 90s, or when I was growing up, or they'll say like the 1800s, because of that word taverns right there, kind of gives it away. But the year that this quote was given was 3000 BC, and I think it's really funny. I think this quote is hilarious, and the fact that it was recorded at that time. But I share this because I wanted to share that this attitude of like, oh, kids these days, that has always been around. And I'm sure that if you are a young person hearing this, you've heard adults say this. And I'm sure that if you are an adult right now, whenever you were young, I'm sure that you've heard adults say this about you, or about your generation. But this attitude has always been around. But also the issues and the topics that we're talking about today, those have also always been around too. And so how we talk about them is, this information is not new. But I wanted to share also that if you have a desire um, to be successful when working with young people, and this is your attitude, you're not going to be very successful. So I invite you and I encourage you that if you have a desire to work with young people, to and this is your attitude, to change that, because we want everyone to be successful when working with the young people that they come in contact with. Um, so this information right here, I always share this with every group that I have the privilege of presenting to and training, but I wanted to introduce my family. So here are my two children. This little girl right here is the one I told the story about, but these are my two children. This is my grandmother. She lived to be 100 years old, and she passed away last year. Here's my mother. Here's me, and then as you can see, right, I'm holding I'm holding this very, very happy, happy, happy baby. So this is 4 generations right here, but this is my family. So going back to the content, again, I always share this with every group. And in my opinion, this is the most important information that I could share. But the first one, and what I say about one, I say about all of these. But the first one is that is identity. Children who are taught who they are or know who they are handle stress and trauma and toxic stress a lot better than children who do not. And what that identity is, that's family identity, cultural identity, gender identity, ethnic identity, spiritual identity. But children who know who they are handle toxic stress and trauma a lot better than kids who do not. The next one's choices, and it's the same exact thing. Children who understand that they have choices and that other people have choices that can affect them, the same exact thing. And so one of the things when we talk about is consent. And what consent is just the ability to make decisions and have choices. The next one is the ability to express, and so that's being able to talk about your feelings, to say what your emotions are, and to express those feelings. And maybe it's not just verbal expression, but maybe it's physical expression through dance, or maybe there's art or writing, playing soccer, like physical expression of some kind. And I'll put a pin in here. And again, remember what I say about one, I say about all of these. But an example of the opposite of this is that, we have veterans that have gone off to war and they experience the things they experience, and when they come back, do they want to talk about it? The answer is typically no. But in the context of children, is that stigma, trauma, negative experiences teaches them, don't talk about it. That no one wants to hear what you have to say, to just be quiet. But going on to the next one, place of belonging. um, children who um, children who have this sense of belonging and family and togetherness, it's that same exact thing. And the way that I would give an example of this is that for those of you that have like elementary age, or high school age, or maybe adult children, do you ever tell them stories about themselves, about when they were little, that they don't remember? Maybe they were very, very helpful, or maybe they did something silly or cute, but they don't remember it. Do you ever tell them stories like that? And typically kids love hearing those stories. Even they say, "Oh, I don't want to hear that," they usually love hearing them anyways. But also, do they know the story of their birth, of when their mother's water broke and taking them to the hospital? Do they know the story of their birth? Or maybe they're adopted, the story of going through the adoption process and sharing that with them, and celebrating that. But when children have that, again, they're much more resilient, and they're able to handle the negative things in their life a lot better than the children who don't have that. The next one's family dinner. Family dinner does not prevent anything. It doesn't prevent anything, but it delays first time episode psychosis. So hearing and seeing things that really aren't there, but it can delay first time episode psychosis, first time suicide attempt, first time risky decision making, first time maybe risky sexual behavior. So it doesn't prevent anything, but it can delay it. And so I always share that these are the 5 most important things of that I could share with anybody. But I want to emphasize that the good positive things inform all these things towards children, but there's also the negative things as well. And so we want to so what we want to do is inform children of the positive side of all of this. Um, Here's a note that was found. This is from an elementary school that I worked with a long time ago. And this is from a second grader. And how old are second graders typically? And they're about usually like 6 or 7 years old, maybe 8 years old. But for the sake of this conversation, we're going to say 7 years old. So the 7-year-old wrote this note saying, "Mrs. Weisner, thank you for all the help over the months that I was in mental pain." And I wanted to ask you guys, like, what characteristics do you see in this note right here? And in this note, I see gratitude, I see self-awareness, I see understanding really big concepts. And the reason why I share this is because what's the difference between the 7-year-olds who are able to recognize and express these emotions and the 7-year-olds who aren't? And in my opinion, the difference is that do children have adults in their life who have given them these tools? And so this presentation today is going to be about giving children those tools to self-recognize and to self-regulate, to have and to recognize the stuff going on, and to recognize their own emotions. So that's what the point of this presentation is today, is how can we be one of those adults? Here's a quote from one of the groups that I got to that I got to do a focus group with, but the quote says, "I know adults are trained to talk to us about suicide and sexual health, and that's great. But is there anything for me to learn how to approach my parents or an adult I think is safe about my mental health or about sex without them freaking out?" And so a little bit older kid than the example last time, but the principle is still the same, is that how can we be adults that young people recognize as safe? How can we be adults that young people can come to? And what are those key indicators of those adults of being a safe adult? So we're going to oops, I accidentally hit something wrong. Let me take the subtitles off. All right. So how can we be those adults? So for the work that I do, I am a interventionalist, meaning that I come in contact with youth and families, typically after something very bad has happened. And we want to have more successful interventions. And what we found in our work is that what leads to more successful interventions is good prevention, which is just good education. And in the work that I do, what we found is that when young people are educated about consent and body autonomy and the sex laws, again, they're much more resilient. But when the crisis does happen, they typically have much better responses. They know what to do. They're more likely to come to adults. And then if it affects them directly, if they need to go into clinical services for whatever reason, they can start their healing process much more quickly than they're much more engaged in the process. They're able to start their healing process. They're able to recognize their feelings, and to trust adults much more quickly than the youth who don't have that same education or knowledge. The other thing that I'd mention that's important about this is that we as adults need to become really experts in having these conversations with young people about consent and body autonomy and sex laws and sexual health. And the reason why I say that is because one of the questions that I get a lot is that when a young person does get to crisis level for whatever reason, one of the questions that comes up is that why didn't this young person come to one of their adults in their life and say that something was wrong? And what we found, the answer is a little bit more nuanced than this, but what it comes down to is that they didn't recognize any adults in their life that were having this conversation already. So be an adult that has the conversation before it is needed. Because if you're an adult that is having these conversations before they're needed, by the time a young person needs it, they're much more likely to come to that adult who is having the conversation already. So don't wait for it to be needed. have it before it's needed. One of the things that's really important to share is, and this is my opinion, is that children don't separate their their poor behavior or their symptoms, if it's negative symptoms, from their identity. And so their poor behavior can become their identity. And so we as adults need to separate these two as much as possible. And I used to teach it just like that, but now I've changed a little bit. And one of the third ones that's just as important is that it's adult interactions with youth, because young people define themselves by the way adults talk about them. And so what we need to do is, with the language that we use in our interaction with young people, is separate their behavior and the separate their negative behavior and any symptoms, negative symptoms that they may be experiencing from who they are. And so when we do that with our language, that's where we see young people can do it for themselves, and we see their identity is based on something positive then instead of something negative. Their self-awareness grows. You see that self-awareness and that maturity, but it's really comes down to the language that adults use to describe youth and also the interactions they have. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about this in just a second. But again, what it comes down to is that, are we honoring individuals by using first person language by the way that we by are we using first person language by the way that we refer to the children we're serving, but also to the families. So with our language, you want to separate the behavior from the child. An example is that, a term that's used to describe children with problematic sexual behavior, a harmful label is juvenile sex offender. And that's a harmful label. It's not helpful. That's the negative consequence I was talking about earlier. And so the example that we use is a child with problematic sexual behavior. So again, separating that from them. So using first person language, but really what it comes down to is that, be aware of, are we creating an inclusive environment by the language that we're using? Are we using inclusive language, not just interacting with families and youth, but are we using it in our policies? Are we using it in our meetings where it's just us as professional, whatever setting it may be, using that correct language? And I'll tell you what, families and young people especially pick up on that stuff very, very quickly. And that's one of those key indicators of a safe person, is using that correct language. Next thing I want to share, I'm only going to focus on these two up here, but so this is high expectations, low expectations, low love, high love. I'm going to focus on these two quadrants right here. But so we'll focus on this first quadrant. So this quadrant, I want you to think of somebody in your life who had authority over you, whether it be a parent or maybe a past supervisor, not your current supervisor, but a past supervisor, maybe a teacher or whatever it may be, but maybe a past employer. Somebody that had really, really, really high expectations for you, but you felt like they did not care about you at all. So very high demand, but also very, very low love for you, or that you felt like they didn't care about you at all. What was that person like? And typically I get like some colorful language comes up, but I'll get stuff like they're a micromanager, I don't trust them, all that stuff. And those are all right. And what I say is that, they can be mean, they're not flexible, they're rigid. Usually their hospitality skills, so their ability to work with the community or work with others, is typically low. Typically people don't like being around them. They come off as self-centered or punitive. And that's this side right here. So I'm going to go over to this side. So I'm going to skip these two down here. So what about the person who had very high expectations for you, very high demand of you, and you also knew that they cared about you a lot? What was that person like? And typically I get like respect. I knew that they cared about me. They were a mentor. They did all of that stuff. And those are all correct too. And again, how I describe that first person is kind and firm. They're straightforward and direct. Usually their hospitality skills, their ability to work with others and work with the community is very high. People like being around them. They value identity, self-worth, and good choices, and they're unapologetic. And what that means is that if they make a mistake or if they mess up, they absolutely apologize. But what that is that they're unapologetic about addressing the elephant in the room. or having the hard conversation. And so I want to compare these two individuals together because both of them have the ability to address the elephant in the room, to have the hard, tough conversation. But the difference is that at the end of that conversation, you know that the person over here on the top right cares about you. That after having the hard conversation, you know that they care about you. I share this with you because young people need more adults who are like that. We need more adults who are willing to have uncomfortable but needed conversations, who are willing to address the elephant in the room, who are willing to address poor, problematic decision making. And at the end of those conversations, are those young people going to know that we care about them? So let's be those types of adults. Now, I'm going to be very honest about something with this. In the morning, I am up here on the top right, and then as I go through the day and my emotional energy goes, I go all over this quadrant. And so it does take real work being up there. It takes real work, real self-care, real self-evaluation to stay up there. So, but anyway, so I invite you that we should always make this our goal. And the last thing I'll say about this is that, what this concept is that it's not just interaction with youth and families, but with the young people we serve, but it's good leadership skills as well. So moving on to the next slide. This quote is from a young person, and I'm pretty sure that everyone has heard something like this, especially if you are working with young people. But it says, "I don't know how to explain it or how it even works, but kids can tell if you really do care about them. If you don't, or if you're not being genuine, they can tell and will not be honest with you." This concept of authenticity and genuineness, if you've worked with young people, everyone has an idea of this or a concept of it, but how important it is to be authentic and to be genuine, because again, young people can pick up on that. And as we define this, I think it's really easy to get lost in the weeds of, like, they can be consistent. They're great at engaging, all that. So we can make a list of the characteristics of individuals who are good at this. But what the young people that I work with did is that they came up with something that I thought was really interesting. And what they said is that what it is, it's the ability to eliminate tension. Or the ability to point out tension. And so what they say is that being genuine is the first step towards effective therapy, or we could say in this case, effective engagement or effective, meaningful conversations. You can tell if someone is very interested in doing the work versus those who don't care as deeply about being there. A lack of genuineness produces more tension. And so what I want to emphasize to you, so going back to that high expectations and high love, is that it's the ability to eliminate tension, or even the ability to address tension when having these conversations with young people. Because it's sometimes we don't have the ability to eliminate all of it, but at least have the ability to be to address it, to have these meaningful conversations. I'm actually going to skip this next section and go on just to the slide behind it. So I want to talk about youth engagement in general and working with young people. And this is kind of like youth engagement according to Clifford. But adults forget what it's like to be young. I have seen that, and I'll give you an example of this, is that, if we have a 16 or a 17-year-old, or just a young person in general, who's like high school age, they may be going through something that to them feels like the end of the world, but we as an adult know that they're going to be okay, whatever it may be. Just because we as an adult know it's going to be okay and know that they're going to be fine, to them, it's those feelings are still real. Those feelings still feel like the end of the world. And so what I've always learned with young people is that, it's not about solving their problems, it's about validating their feelings. I think that's really the difference between adults and young people, is that young people are looking for validation of their feelings, and that's that building that trust. So moving on to the next one, so community, trust, and connection. These three, in my opinion, really do go together. A young person must learn to trust you, if they're going to connect with you. And again, if we're going to have conversations about the ones that we're having today. And my own work, I was really, really good at engaging with young people, really, really good at building rapport and trust. What I was bad at was expanding that trust to other helpful adults. And so if you have that ability, it's not just about engaging and building connection, it's about building community around young people, because when they have that community, they're much more resilient and able to succeed much, much better. Youth engagement is not how youth interact, it's how adults behave. So it's our own behavior. So we need to be self-reflective if we're going to be successful at this. One of the things that comes up a lot I've heard is that we've said, how can we get young people to trust us? And it's not about getting young people to trust us. It's about, are we trustworthy? Have we earned their trust? And are we trustworthy individuals? Next, I'd say that it's not about youth entertainment. I'm not here to entertain youth. That's not my role. That's not my job. I'm here to connect with them and have meaningful conversations with them. And going back to authenticity, be yourself. Be yourself, but yourself needs to be better. So we should always be striving to be our best selves. We want young people to grow and develop and mature into their best selves. So we need to model that by also doing it for ourselves. And the last thing I'd mention here, well, the last thing before I touch on this is eventually we lose our touch. Um, Eventually we have a little bit less patience. We have a little bit less emotional endurance, and that's totally okay. And I eventually think that comes for everybody, but just be mindful and self-aware of those things. And I'm going to talk about youth voice, choice, and leadership a little bit later. So also in having this conversation, I want you to be aware of the role and also the different roles that adults play, but that you play in a young person's life. And I'll use myself as an example. Then I have two other stories that I want to share about this. But I'm a parent and a caregiver to my two children, but then to other young people I come in contact with, I can play the role of a mentor. I'm a my one of my roles is I'm a mental health professional. I'm not a teacher, but these are just examples up here. I'm not a medical provider, but these are just other examples. But be mindful of the roles that you play in a young person's life, because that really does matter. And I'll share you two examples. The first one's from the parent perspective. One of my colleagues, she worked with that 13ish through about 25ish age range, so teenagers and young adults. And she said something really interesting when she was doing frontline work. She said, for the teenagers and the young adults and the youth that I worked with, I had endless patience, endless compassion, endless understanding. But for my own children, my own teenage children, I have none of that. And I thought that was really funny, but also really telling of just how the dynamics different, the role, because of the role that you play. So that was from the adult perspective. Now from the youth perspective, what another person that I work with, and her whole job is training or is talking to youth and young people in general about consent and body autonomy and sex laws, and the conversations we're having about this. And she has three teenage boys, three teenage sons, and you better believe her three teenage sons know all about this. But what's interesting is that it's all of the teenage sons' friends, all of their friends come to her and ask questions about these topics. Anytime that they have questions, they come to her and ask. But her own three sons don't come to her and ask questions. And I want to know, like, why? Like, how come the teenage boys, how come their friends come and ask, but not the own children come and ask? And the reason why is because that's mom. It's different. It's different when it's your own mom. It's than it being your mom's friend. And so I share this with you to be mindful of the role that you play in a young person's life, because you may have the same expectations for all the youth you come in contact with, but youth don't have the same expectations for you. So expectations are different. A young person that I worked with said that, the praise and correction that I get from my English teacher is different to me than the praise and expectations I have from my parents. And so it's different. So context matters. Disappointment and praise and correction, it matters from who it's coming from. The next thing about this too is that any one of the roles that you play can be a safe person, but also youth do not always know who is safe, but they always know who is unsafe. They can recognize that very quickly. And they have said that, whenever you learn an adult is unsafe, it's very painful. It's a very painful experience to do that. And so, but we want to be a safe adult. And so having a safe adult improves the quality of a young person's life. And a safe adult is the person who has these types of conversations. And again, and I promise we will get to that a little bit later. Um, so how do young people identify a safe adult? And so this is from them. And so the first thing they said is, my experience is contextualized. And what that means is that recognizing that this young person's experience, good or bad, negative or positive, doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens within the context of who they are, where they're from, the community that they're part of, and the other experiences that young people are having. So their experience, so their experience is contextualized by the adults around them. Safe adults use correct terms, labels, and phrases when referring to body parts, but also groups of people and individuals as well. They've said that my value as a person is what matters most. And so going back to, are we separate? Is our language separating their poor behavior or their symptoms from their person? So what it is that their value as a person, as an individual, is what matters most, and validating those things. They celebrate connection, community, and identity. They celebrate young people. One thing that I've always said is that we need to celebrate to the same intensity that we also punish. Like that so we need to celebrate these things as well. um, they have the ability to address doubt and tension, and they admit when they don't know. And it's okay to not have all the answers. I don't have all the answers, and I don't pretend to. And so and so but what I've seen is that it's okay to say, I don't know. And remember, young people, having solutions to your problems is good, but validating a young person's feelings is even better. And finally, they've said that, my honesty is safe with them. I know that they're trustworthy. So this is how the young people that I've worked with, this is how they define a safe person. So let's move on to social media and technology. I know there's a lot of presentations and a lot of information about this. I'm only going to cover a very specific portion of this. There are other places you can look. I know that we've talked about this in other past webinars. And I would encourage you to go check those out too, along with this one. But let's talk about social media and its impact that's had on sexual development. So look at this image. How does this image make you feel when you see it? And some people are like, oh, I feel anxious. And then some people are like, it depends on who it's from. But me, it makes me feel anxious. What about being left on red? How does that make you feel? Or being left on red 3 days ago? How does that make you feel? And then what do filters do? Um, Filters have played a big role. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But one of the things that has come up that a lot of people ask is that, why does social media dominate almost all aspects of a young person's life? And I think there's several answers to that, but here's the one that I'll give, is that with social media, you can dictate your own level of comfort. You can, even to a degree, we talk about filters, dictate your physical appearance. You can control these things, and you can also control how you're perceived by others. That's what social media offers. And in my own opinion, you can dictate what your identity is on in this very comfortable, very safe way. But when we talk about growth and maturity and development and learning, for young people, it's all about getting out of your comfort zone. To a degree, it's really not, to a degree, not caring what people think of your physical appearance, and also to a degree the same thing of not putting too much stock in how you're perceived by others. And so it's just really interesting duality there. The other thing I'd mention about social media for here is that there's a risk and there's a benefit. And up here is the benefit. There's a great education, there's community. It offers identity formation, independence, communication, and you feel involved. You feel connected. So that's the benefit. Now here's the risk down here. Young people are at risk for being isolated, drug accessibility, sexually explicit media, misinformation. There's very little to almost no accountability, bullying and harassment. So that's the risk. But what I've seen in my work, and actually what I've also heard other people say too, is that if you have a young person who is at risk for any one of these. Let's say if they're at risk for isolation online, you take away social media, all that stuff, they're still at risk. They're still at risk for isolation. Um, Now there's this middle part that is really interesting, and this could go either way. So there's interaction with strangers, the impact that it has on mental health, and like self-disclosure, so disclosing sensitive information about yourself. So it can be beneficial, but also it can be risky as well. So this just depends on that youth and the situation. But anyways, so there's benefit and the risk. I'm not here to say it's social media is good or bad. I just wanted to share that, here's some of the lessons that we've learned from it when working with young people. But growing up in social media, I've heard a lot of people describe this, that there's a participatory culture. And really what that is that, you don't need a cell phone to be happy. You really don't. But if all of your peers have one and you don't have one, you know, you feel left out. Meeting strangers is normal. I'm not going to say it's good or bad. It's just, that's how people meet. An example of this down here is that a lot of young people I work with say, some of the best friendships I've had are people that I've met gaming online. For mental health, is it good or bad? It just depends on that particular youth. Um, Once adults are aware of a particular media platform, youth typically leave it. And then finally, I think one of the differences that we've noticed between the older generation and young people is that privacy is not seen as an issue for young people. So again, these are just some information about growing up with social media. Now, with cyberbullying, cyberbullying used to be under the umbrella of bullying. Now I think those two things have switched. But with cyberbullying, victims do not always know who is bullying them. The perception is that everyone knows, and that a lot of the youth that I've worked with who've been victims of cyberbullying harassment, is what we found out is that usually it's like one or two people who are harassing them, but because they don't know who it is, it feels like it's coming from everywhere. That whatever they're being bullied about, everyone's doing it, even though it's one or two people, because of that anonymity. But cyberbullying, it's incredibly cruel. There's a lot of homophobic slurs, feminine slurs. It's just incredibly cruel. It most time typically ends after entering adulthood or moving away. Um, Kids who are cyberbullied, they're 10 times more likely to die by suicide or attempt suicide. And so the reason why I'm sharing this with you is because this intersectionality with the conversation we're having today is very big. But when it comes to what do we do with youth who are experiencing this, what we tell them is that when you do experience this, when this is happening, whether it's happening to you or someone that you know, come tell me. So have that conversation before and say, when this happens, come tell me that this is going on. And so again, have the conversation before it's needed. Oops, I hit the subtitles again. Um, so let's transition to sex and sexuality and pornography. But for those of you that are in the military, is being in the military anything like the video game Call of Duty? And I've asked this in person for the presentation I give, and everyone's like, no, it's nothing like it at all. And well, that's the same relationship that sex and pornography have with each other. But I share this with you because if we don't teach our kids about sex, if we don't have these conversations about sexuality, sexual development, about consent and body autonomy, um, pornography is going to do it. Pornography is going to teach them about these things. So we need to have this conversation before. So social media and pornography, like the connection there. I want to talk about this space in the middle. And so let's go to that space in the middle. And it's pretty big, but the reason why I want to mention this is because that space in the middle, a lot of pornography is promoted on social media, and also vice versa. That's one of the intersections that has changed really in the last couple of years. And I share this with you because um, young people are going to come across this content. If they're participating in social media, the chances are that they're probably going to come across content like this or be exposed to gateways that allow them to access this content. And so again, have conversations with young people before it's needed about the risk and what this is, because they are going to be exposed to it. Just by nature of participating on social media or just participating with their peers. So again, and the principle here is that if you don't teach your kids who they are, I promise you the world is going to. If you don't teach your kids about sex and sexuality and sexual health, the pornography is going to. So how important it is for us to do that, to have these conversations before it's needed. So let's talk about prevention and education of young people. So when it comes to like sexual assault prevention curriculum, teen dating violence prevention and education. One of the things that really the experts have said in this field is that the information is constantly being updated. About every like 18 months to 2 years, new research is coming out on this. And so it's constantly being updated. And so for the context of what we're doing is that curriculum is a great starting point, but it's incomplete without the real conversations that come after that. And so we can use curriculum kind of like as a guiding post, but what we really want to do is have those meaningful, authentic conversations with young people about this. And it's not just one time. We need to have them as often as possible. It's not just as it's needed. We need to have them as often as possible. And when we do talk about this, there's a need for see if I say this word correctly, because remember I stuttered on this when I practiced earlier, but there's a need for heteronormative language for this as well. There's a huge need for that. And so going back to, are we using inclusive language? Are we indicating to other young people that we're safe by using that inclusive language of everybody? There's also interactions in the physical space, but also the digital space as well. We're going to talk about digital consent. Well, actually, I'll talk about right now, actually. So there's physical consent, in like touching someone's body or touching their belongings or those that, but there's also digital consent as well. And so we need to talk about that as also. The other thing that's really important to know is that sexual health education and sexual assault prevention generates conversations on other topics that are important, but also can be difficult to discuss as well. So be aware of that. If we're going to have this conversation, it will generate other conversations that can be difficult to talk about as well. And the last thing for this slide is that if we're going to do this, it raises the bar for everybody. It raises the bar and the accountability for the young people, but also for us as adults too. And so I say, like, let's embrace that. Moving on to the next slide. So teen dating violence prevention and education. I think that the big thing that we've seen and the big thing that a lot of young people talk about is defining expectations of intimacy. And so that's not just physical intimacy, but also emotional intimacy. Is that, what does that look like? Is it developmentally appropriate? All of those things. But one of the things that we share with the young people that we work with and that they say is important is knowing to be ready, knowing what I want to do, and is this something that I want to be a part of? So having these honest conversations about defining these things. But the reason why this is important is because youth commonly confuse inappropriate behavior with acts of devotion. An example of this will be the top picture where it says, I didn't know the difference between caring about someone and controlling them. And so it's so important for us to have these conversations. Otherwise, if we don't, situations like this can happen. Pornography can play a role in the education of young people about relationships and dating. And the reason why I say that is because a lot of the narratives of pornography start out with like the female actress saying, no, don't, stop, I don't like, or like I don't want to do this, to ouch, this is painful, this hurts, to then it being enjoyable. And that's not that actually, let me back up. Let's think about the messaging that sends to young people about relationships or about sex. And so what we need to teach young people is that that's not an accurate portrayal of intimacy or even just a relationship in general. So we need to be aware of that as well. Social media and technology play a huge role in dating and relationship development. And so a lot of young people may meet in person, but where they get to know each other is through like texting and online, where I guess where they plan dates or where they ask each other out. on social media, and then they meet in person. So it plays a role in that relationship development. And then again, digital consent and education is needed. So again, there's physical consent in the physical space, but there's also that those same principles apply within the digital space as well. One thing that I always share, so we talk about good prevention, but I always share, I have this slide, I have it like on a piece of paper, and I will give this to young people and go over this, and we'll start on the left side. And I always say, you know what, if anyone ever says this to you, it's not okay. And it's also not okay to say this to another person. That saying these things is not okay. It's never okay for us to say it to someone. It's never okay for someone to say it to us. And so I go over this and I share that if anyone ever says something like this to you, or text something like this to you, if you have a partner that's doing that, that's not okay. Or even just a friend that's doing that too. That's not okay, and you need to come tell us. But what's really interesting is that when we do share this information, boy, the conversation it generates about with young people about what is okay and not okay to interact with somebody, and to say something. So it's so important to have these conversations before. And then on the right side, the same exact thing. We go over, what is stalking? What does that look like? How does that look in the physical space versus the digital space? These different things, like demanding check-ins, is not okay. If anyone ever tries to explaining what blackmail is, and explain what that is, and saying that that's not okay if someone does that to you. If someone wants to track you and show if someone wants to track you and know where you're at all times, that's not okay. So anyways, having these conversations before they're needed, but when you do have these conversations before they're needed, it indicates that you're a safe person. And the conversations that it generates with young people and you about this, that's what we're talking about, is that how can we have those meaningful conversations. Going to the next slide. So sexting and nudes, it's very common in adults and also young people. And I know we've talked about this in previous presentations, but this is illegal. And so I've talked with young people, it's like, hey, this is illegal. There's some pretty serious consequences that can happen from this if you do this. And despite those conversations, it still happens. And as you can see, one of the young people that we work with reported that it is illegal, and I don't do it, but almost every single person at my school does do this. And so I think it's important to be aware of that. And so again, it's super common in adults and youth, but I've seen in my work that as young as 5th grade, nudes are social currency. So like whenever one person will take a picture, they'll send it to somebody, that person can quickly spread it around. We've talked about this in a previous webinar, but I feel like it's important to go over this again. There is a difference between child pornography and youth produced images. Child pornography is made by adults with the purpose to be produced and consumed as pornography, versus a youth produced image is an image that is created by a youth that's not meant to be pornography. And there needs to be that in some states have a legal distinction between those. It's so important to have that, because whenever this does come up, that how we intervene in this really does matter. And we want to help young people, and we do want accountability, but we also want growth and maturity as well with that. And so it's very important to recognize that. For this as well, what the way that I would approach this, and the attitude that I have, is that it's not a matter of if a kid engages in this behavior, but it's when they do. So when we do have these conversations with young people, we try to we always discourage them from doing this and say, hey, these are the consequences, this is the risk, please don't do it. And so again, the attitude that we always approach is, and it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when this happens. And whenever it does come out, it's very difficult to have successful interventions. Pressuring for nudes is perceived as common behavior for males. That's what a lot of the young women we work with report back. And it's perceived as a way to create income as well. And we'll talk about that on the next slide. So what I wanted to mention about this, and I hope I say this correctly, because this is very, very important. Pornography and the pornography industry used to be this thing that happened far away. And over the last 3 or 4 years, there's been this rise of amateurism. And as you can see, like in the Pornhub numbers, the top search for 2019 was amateur. And part of that too is we've also seen there's been there's been crowdsourcing websites that have changed how pornography is produced and consumed, and that's like fans only, Patreon, like those types of websites. And so that has changed how pornography is created but also accessed as well. And so that's also has changed how youth have access to as well. And so what is local, what is global is now local, and local is now global. And what that means is that, again, it went from this thing that happened far away to now it's something that my neighbor can do because of cell phones, because of the internet, because of the advancement of technology. It's something that someone down the street can do. And so the reason why this is important to understand, and the reason why it's important to educate children about this, is because of the way that pornography has changed. It also has changed the way that those who would exploit children, it's changed the way, it's changed their tactics as well. And so what we need to do is have good prevention and education for young people about this, because when they have adults who are willing to have conversations with children about this topic, it reduces that risk of their exploitation. Um, it is perceived as a way to generate income, but here's the thing: young people are not always young people are aware that these things exist, but they don't always understand the risk and how to avoid them. So that's the part where it plays, that we need to educate young people about this. If you guys have more questions about this, there are here's more information about this, about how to talk to young people about this, the risks and all that. It's some great information. If you have it, I know it's going to be shared after the presentation as well. And even though that children are over sexualized, they're still not ready to have sex. But if they do, this is sometimes, actually, this is the responses that we get. And it's that I didn't know porn wasn't real, or that sex wasn't really like that, until someone told me porn wasn't like that. Another response was, I was not emotionally ready for that. And it was not at all like I thought it'd be. I wasn't ready for that, and I shouldn't have done that. And so again, even though that children are exposed to this and they become over sexualized and they think they're ready, and they engage in sexual behavior, they find out very quickly that that they weren't ready. And so be aware of that as well. There's more information about this topic here, and I would encourage you guys to go check out these webinars as well. So finally, let's dive into how to talk to young people about sex and sexuality, and everything that goes along with that. So when we bring up the topic of sex and sexuality and sexual development, sometimes it can be overwhelming because it brings in all these other just as important but also related topics. And this can feel very, very overwhelming. And I know a lot of people feel like they don't know where to begin because there is so much to talk about. But when we talk to our youth, so when we talk to youth about this, what they have said, is this is the starting point right here. This is where we start, is start with consent, start with sex laws, and start with body autonomy and teen dating violence prevention. This is what the youth of those youth advisories have said. This is where you start. This is also where the experts say to start. And I share this again because when this topic does come up, it can feel very overwhelming. It can feel like a lot to cover, but this is the starting point right here. This is where we can start. For our youth partnership board, they have essentially said the same thing. They said, we need adults who are willing to have honest conversations about consent. We need to know what the sex laws are. And again, have honest conversations about pornography and just sex and intimacy in general. This is the starting point right here. And I share this because I feel like this is it's much more easy to understand. It's a lot more digestible, and it doesn't feel as overwhelming. It can still feel hard, but but it's not as overwhelming as it was before. So this is the starting point, and this is where youth say is the best starting point right here. So consent education and how young people define it. So so when we talk about consent, it's very obviously about sexual relationships. Um, but the way that young people have defined it is that it's not just in sex, but it's all aspects of life. It's not just their body, it's their clothes, it's their hair, it's their backpack, it's everything. And so they said is that yes, there's consent education around sex, but we need to apply these principles to all aspects of life. I thought that was really interesting and really telling how young people view it. Next thing is body autonomy, and body autonomy is the belief that a person has the right and the say of what happens to their body, and we need to teach that within the context of who they are. An example of this was there was a young man and a young lady that had the privilege of talking to me about this, and they said, we are descendants of slaves, and our ancestors didn't have body autonomy, and that's why it's so important to me that now that I have mine, to always remember that. And so we need to share this information within the context of who they are. One of the things that across the board that all young people have like really advocated for is the need for the standardization of sex laws. And part of that too is that just the need for education about the sex laws within their community, within their state and province. But that's something that every single one of them has talked about. And then going back to this, I think we've said this many times, but you're going to hear it many more times. The need for honest conversations about sex and intimacy and sexual health from adults, and that being taught pornography is not a realistic expectation of sex. And when does this education start? The young people have said that it starts at birth. We need to start this at day one. Um, and what I would add to this too is that with the work that we have is that we have an adult ally, the person who educates the young person. That's typically like the model that we follow, the model that we see. But what young people have said that they need is that the education that they get, they want to be able to turn that education around and educate their peers, and to talk to their peers about this and share how important it is to them, but not just their peers, but also other adults too when it's needed. So youth want to be educated on these topics, but they want to be educated in a way to where they can educate the adults in their life and also the peers in their life about this same stuff too. The next level up from this is that what they've said is that I want to know how to do this in a way that protects me. I don't want to disclose anything that's happened to me, because when I share this information with my peers or even adults, they will turn around and ask, well, why do you care about this topic? Did something happen to you that made you care about this topic? And that's pretty common from the youth we hear about. And so what they've said is that we need adults to educate us on these topics in a way that we can not only educate our peers and our adults, but also do in a way that protects ourselves as well. Um, so young people, education on sexual health and sexual assault prevention. The attitude that we really follow is that it's not about protecting kids, but it's about preparing them as well. So we want to protect them, but we also want to prepare them that when they come in contact with these situations, or if it does happen in their community, we want to prepare them for that. Um, there's a need for present examples. We need more adults who say, I care about this topic. This is a topic that I care about right now. And so we need present examples from adults. Um, the same attitude that we have is that always assume that a young person has had experience with some form of sexual violence. And what that means is that maybe not themselves, but maybe they know of somebody who's been the victim of sexual violence. Because when we approach it that way, we use correct terms, we use correct labels, and the words and the actions that we do when talking about this conversation reduces harm, because that's what we want to do. So just make that assumption already from the beginning. I said this already, but it's not about problem solving, it's about the validation of feelings. So that's what youth are looking for. Once their feelings are validated, then we can start talking about the problems that they're facing. Um, Also at this, it's not just the immediate aftermath. Say there's a sexual assault that occurs within their community. So it's not just the immediate aftermath that we need to be worried about. It's also the anniversaries, the milestones. So like the birthdays, the graduations, the homecomings, it's those things as well. And I think the most important thing that has come up from this, from the young people that we've talked to, is that it's not just what. So there's the what, there's the sex laws, there's consent, but they've said it's how you talk about this is much more important than what we talk about. The attitude that we have towards this topic is what matters most, and it must become our culture. This is the culture that we must do and need to embrace. And I would add just my own opinion on this. This is hard. This is difficult. This is very hard to do, but we do hard things. So sexual health education and the mental health of young people. So there's mental health and then there's mental illness. You can have a mental health, you can have a mental illness and a diagnosis and have great mental health. And how I define that is that your symptoms are manageable. And you can also not have a mental illness and poor mental health. But I just want to separate these two and recognize there is a difference between these two things. And so with the intersection for the concept that we're talking about today, is that when we talk about the mental health of young people, it needs to be done within the context of who they are. An example of this would be what I've seen is that, talk about mental health in a urban community is very, very different than talking about mental health in a rural community. And so we need to do it within the context of who they are. Trauma history is very common in the state that I'm from. So and trauma impacts mental health. So we're always aware of that. The mental health of a young person must always be associated with their skills and their understanding. And so what we found is that if young people, the more skills they have, the better their mental health is probably going to be. The more understanding they have about concepts or whatever it may be, the better their mental health is going to be. So how this fits in the conversation that we're having today about the education of young people about sexual health is that, do they understand consent? Do they know what the sex laws are? Do they understand body autonomy? Do they have those understandings? And now the skills is that, do they have the skills to educate others? Do they have the skills to come to an adult and to start the conversation if it's needed? And so we want to improve the skills and understanding. And what we found is that when young people have these skills and have these understanding, their mental health is so much better in the long run than if they don't have these already. For the sake of time, I'm going to skip this section right here and go on to the next one. When it comes to empowering young people, again, these skills and these understandings, this is what empowers young people. And also it gives them the ability to maintain their well-being. And so we talked about consent and education and all that stuff, but all this stuff plays a role into that. So how to talk to young people about important topics. So there are specific topics, whether it be medication, sex and sexual health, addiction, consent, and trauma. Those all can be very difficult topics to talk about. And there's different ways that we approach them. Like there's the way that a clinician or a doctor talks about them would be different than, say, like someone like myself, like a social worker or a police officer or a teacher, so trained professionals. And that's different than how a parent or a family or a mentor, maybe an older sibling, an aunt or an uncle or a foster family talk about them. And so be aware of the role that you play. Maybe there's other youth that talk about this, but regardless of what it is, it's all difficult to talk about. But what matters most is how you talk about it. The attitude that you have, the spirit you do it with, is what matters most to young people. And again, this is hard. This is difficult. But let's embrace that. And we'll talk more about that in a second. So this is from young people directly. This is what they've said is, be honest and be direct. That's the most important. They said, be honest and be direct. Over here, this orange bubble, they actually said, they said a very colorful word, but I changed that word to, don't be an unsafe person. So that's what they say, is like, try not to be an unsafe person. Does the young person you're working with, or the ones you come in contact with, do they know you generally care about them? Now, you may generally care about them, but do they know that? And finally, and so going back to the part where like this is hard, this can be very awkward to talk about. It can feel uncomfortable. What the young people have said is that, hey, it's awkward and uncomfortable when an adult talks to me about it. And what they said is that just embrace that. This is an important topic, so let's embrace that awkward. Let's embrace that uncomfortable space and talk about this because it is important. The following are quotes from young people that I had the privilege and honor of working with through the as I was preparing for this presentation. These are kind of like quotes from them, but this first one is, I always wanted to get better. I always wanted to heal, but I never got that chance when I was in residential. And that made me very angry. It wasn't until I came here and learned to let go of that anger and start my healing process. What this was referring to was that he didn't know that this 16-year-old didn't know that this place was safe until the adults there were using correct terms, labels, and phrases, and he instantly knew that that place was safe. So how important it is that we do that. The next one is that, it's hard to feel safe about my feelings because my whole family is military, and their training taught me growing up that I cannot feel any type of sensitivity or vulnerability. And this topic is something that makes everyone feel vulnerable. And that last phrase right there is, this topic, especially with talking with young people, it makes you vulnerable. And so recognizing that and also honoring that as well. Section right here said, when my dad was on deployment, my mom did the work of two parents. She worked full time. She went to school and raised us. I saw how busy she was, and I did not want to add to her stress with my problem, so I never said anything. And so again, going back to how important it is to have these conversations before it's needed, to be adults who start the conversation and then continue that conversation as often as possible. Then here's one right here that I love this particular quote. It says, self-reliance and independence is a huge value in our military community. And it's a value that I will always be grateful that was instilled into me growing up. I love this quote because um, this was given in the context of like, hey, how do we talk to youth about this topic? And this is what they said. But I think there's times whenever there's an issue within a community, it feels like we don't have the tools or resources to address whatever problem that is. Well, in this situation, that's not true at all. All of the tools, all of the resources are already present. And so these are the strengths of that community. And that's something that I think is just wonderful to have, that almost all the young people that I've talked to from a military background have said this, that this self-reliance and this independence is something that's a part of our community. And I'm so grateful that was instilled in me in a young age. I love that quote. It shows the strength and resilience of this community. I've learned that there are two types of confidentiality. One, I can be honest and feel safe and heard, and the other is that issues need to stay hidden and it's not safe to be heard. And that's from a 17-year-old. And that talks about, I think this is like the impact of stigma, and what happens when we don't create those spaces to talk and have these conversations. And finally, this is the last quote. When you finally meet that adult who actually gets it, it changed my life. They changed my life. They saved my life and they don't even know it. And this was referring to, again, what does it mean to a young person to have that safe adult that is willing to have these honest conversations with them and to start those conversations and the impact that it can have. So that's my presentation. I'm finished. Any questions, comments? I hope this was helpful for you all. I hope you gained some resources and gained some tools. But I really hope that this was helpful for you guys. But if there are any questions or comments, I can take those now.
Thanks so much, Clifford. That was lovely. Yes, and please, if you have any questions about any of the content that was covered, please feel free to go ahead and pop that in the chat, and we will get those covered with Clifford. We did have a few notes in the chat as you were speaking, Clifford. If you could speak a little to your work and the intersection of laws and that we will be having 2 upcoming webinars. I will let y'all know in our sexual behavior series. So you can RSVP for those in November and December, specifically focusing on laws and the juvenile justice system and responses to these cases. However, could you speak a little to your work and that disconnect in terms of laws across like different states?
Yeah. So in Oklahoma, one of the things that I get to do for my work is I get to train police officers in crisis intervention in regards to young people and their families. And one of the things that comes up is actually this question right here, is that so some states have a legal distinction between there's child pornography and there's youth produced images. They have a legal distinction between those two. And the reason why is, and this is a great example that I'll share here. There's a police officer I was working with, and he said that there was a 15-year-old girl who was taking images of herself and then sending them to people she didn't know online. And what they found was that they because in her state there wasn't a legal distinction, it was all child pornography. This young lady was going to be charged with a felony, with several felony counts, because of what she was doing. And what what this law enforcement agency realized, was that that was not helpful. That what this 15-year-old needed wasn't felony charges and risk for prison. What she needed was help. What she needed was therapeutic help. And um and so and so what they realized was that the laws that they had weren't helpful. And so what we need to have here is there needs to be there needs to be legal distinction between child pornography and youth produced images, because again, we want accountability for everybody, but when it comes to children, we want that accountability to come. We don't want that accountability to cause further harm. We want it to create growth. We want it to create maturity. We want it to create well-being. So again, going back to the question, there are some states that have those laws where there's a legal distinction between the two, but also there's some states that don't, at all, and then it can engender those very difficult legal situations to navigate when it comes to helping children.
Thank you. And we did have a question regarding the distinction between child pornography and youth produced images, and if that is dependent on who is in possession of the image or produced the image.
So I would say that I'm not quite the expert on that, but um, I would say come to those next webinars. But that's a question that gets asked a lot, especially in the trainings that I get. So I would encourage you guys to come to the webinars that are going to cover that.
Thank you. And we also had one more question regarding strategies for working with youth. Do you have any recommendations on working with suspected youth who are reluctant to share, despite, all of the strategies and information you provided today, just working with those youth who even as presenting as a trusting adult and trying to open that communication, who are still very reluctant to speak to you?
Consistency, consistency, and follow up. That's probably like the biggest thing that I would say, because I've learned that as it's very difficult for youth to open up and be vulnerable, especially when their environment has told them not to be. And so what we need to do is change their environment and just consistently follow up, and not just us, but create a community of safe adults around this around a kiddo, and have them present the same way as that safe adult and to start those conversations. The other thing I'd mention too, one thing that has always worked for me was whenever you give them the option and say, hey, you don't have to talk to me if you don't want to, but I want to give you the choice to do so, and I'm going to follow up too on it. So what I've learned is that whenever young people are given that option, um, almost 99% of the time they always take that option to open up. But it's hard, but it's consistency and consistency and consistency.
Thank you, Clifford, and thank you so much for that deep dive and presentation, speaking to your work and your work with youth. And we appreciate you joining us to speak to that. And thank you all for your questions and everything. And here, as we begin to wrap things up for the end of the session, I want to cover continuing education credit information for anyone who hopes to obtain that. And again, a list of all of these resources and any of the ones that Clifford referenced today are available on the webinar event page, as well as within 24 to 48 hours of us officially concluding the webinar here in a few moments, an archived recording of the session will be made available for you to access if you would like a replay or any additional information covered. Again, you can access that on the event page. Just visit it back within a few days and you will see the recording there. So for anyone hoping to obtain continuing education credits for today, if you have not completed the process with us before, on the event page, you will see a purple button like the one currently on the screen now. That purple button will say continuing education, and it will be up under the continuing education credit on the event page. All of the available options for obtaining CE credits will be listed as well. And if you just click that button, you will be taken to an evaluation where you can share your thoughts on today's session, as well as Clifford's presentation and the content covered. For that, we have a few questions that we'll ask you regarding the session and what you gleaned from the session. Then you will be, once you have completed that, you will be taken to a list of available CE credits like the one listed currently on the screen. We will be offering continuing education credits through the University of Texas at Austin Steve Hicks School of Social Work, as well as the Commission for Case Manager certification. 1.5 hours will also be available through the National Council on Family Relations, and MFLN offers as well certificates of completion to track any additional professional development hours. All of that is available once you click the continuing education link and are taken to a Qualtrics form that you will complete and then be able to obtain your CE. If this is your first time completing this with us, or if you have any issues with your email and receiving that, within 24 to 48 hours, again, of completing that, if you were able to get on Qualtrics and do that and have not received your certification in the email, we do ask that you check your spam folder first, because sometimes, just depending, I know y'all are probably very, very familiar with, depending on the email that day, sometime it will kick it to your spam folder. However, if you have any issues receiving that and you have checked your spam folder for that, please send us an email at mflnfamilydevelopment@gmail.com, and Jason or I will assist you in receiving that and make sure you get your certification for your time. This webinar is also part of the SBCY Sexual Behavior in Children and Youth series. Our next upcoming webinar in the series will be on September the 16th, and will cover the typical social, emotional, cognitive, and moral development of preschool to school age children and onward, and what is developmentally appropriate within those domains of sexual knowledge and behavior. We'll be diving a little bit more into that. So you can RSVP and find more information on that session, as on that upcoming session, as well as other upcoming sessions that we will be having in the series, which will also include deep diving a little bit more into laws across states, as well as juvenile justice responses on our series homepage or on each individual event page. All of that information is available on our MFLN website. If you would like to stay updated on upcoming webinars, as well as day before webinar reminders, upcoming events, and other CE opportunities from our Military Families Learning Network, as well as blogs and other resources, we do invite you to subscribe to our mailing list, which is available in the chat pod currently, as well as available at militaryfamiliesnetwork.org, family development / stay connected. We sent out reminders on that, and if you would like to be a part of those emailing lists, you can subscribe on that page. Thank you again so much, Clifford, for your time today, and for everyone for joining us. And to wrap things up officially, I'm going to turn things back over to Coral.
Thank you, Kaylin. I simply want to echo Kaylin's thanks to Clifford for your expertise and for this incredible knowledge and information today, as well as sharing the experiences of those young people that you've worked with. Thank you also to the Family Development Team for hosting today's session, as well as the SBCY series. There is so much rich information in that series, so I just want to reiterate, please head over to that homepage for this webinar series to find out about archived webinars that we have already walked through, as well as the upcoming sessions that Kaylin mentioned. We are officially at the bottom of the hour, so we're going to close out the room here in just a moment, but one final reminder that all of the information that we covered today, as well as additional resources and the continuing education and recording, is all available on our one-stop shop, the event page for today's webinar. So thank you again for taking time out of your day to join us. We wish you a wonderful rest of your day and look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care, and thanks again. All right, thank you again for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and close out the room at this time. Again, please feel free to reach out to Kaylin and the Family Development Team if you have any follow-up questions, and we wish you a wonderful rest of your day. Take care and talk to you soon.